Hi guys, today we are going to tell you strange extinct animals everybody forgot. Take a slow breath and let your shoulders relax. Tonight we are not rushing anywhere. We are not chasing dates or facts or timelines. Instead, we are gently stepping backward through time into ages so distant that the world itself felt unfamiliar. A softer earth, a quieter earth. A place where creatures lived entire lives without ever knowing they would one day be called strange or forgotten. When we imagine the past, we often picture dinosaurs, mammoths, or saber-toothed cats. These famous giants tend to stand at the front of our memory, loud and dramatic, but behind them, stretching far deeper into time, are countless other beings. Animals that were odd, delicate, experimental, or simply unlucky. Creatures that walked, swam, crawled, and drifted through ancient worlds for millions of years and then disappeared, leaving behind only fragments, shadows, and questions. Tonight's journey is about those animals, not the famous ones, not the ones with blockbuster documentaries, but the forgotten ones, the strange ones, the ones that seem almost unreal, as if nature itself was dreaming when it made them. As you listen, you may notice your thoughts beginning to slow. That is intentional. These stories are not meant to excite or alarm. They are meant to drift, to move gently like sediment settling at the bottom of a quiet sea. You don't need to remember every detail. You don't need to visualize every shape. Just let the words wash over you, carrying you backward through time. Our journey begins far earlier than most people ever imagine. Long before forests rustled with leaves. Long before animals had bones or faces we would recognize. Long before eyes looked out at the world the way ours do today. We begin more than 500 million years ago, during a period scientists now call the Cambrian explosion. Despite its dramatic name, this was not a sudden blast or catastrophe. It was a slow unfolding, a quiet blooming of life in the oceans where evolution seemed to experiment freely, trying shapes and forms that would never appear again. Imagine shallow prehistoric seas warmed by a distant sun. The water is calm. Light filters down in soft blue layers. There are no fish as we know them yet, no coral reefs, no whales singing, just a drifting world of unfamiliar motion. In this ancient ocean lived a creature so strange that when scientists first discovered its fossils, they could not even tell which side was up. This creature is called hallucigenia. Its name alone feels dreamlike, as though it wandered out of a half-remembered sleep, and in many ways it did. Hallucigenia was small, no longer than your finger. Its body was thin and worm-like, with soft segments stretching from one end to the other. Along one side of its body were long, stiff spines. Sharp, rigid structures that looked like stilts or spikes. On the opposite side were soft, flexible tentacle-like legs, gently curving as if made for slow, careful movement across the seafloor. For years, scientists believed hallucigenia walked on its spines, with its soft tentacles waving uselessly in the water above. Later, they realized the truth was the opposite. The spines were for protection, pointing upward, while the soft limbs carried it gently forward. Even its head was a mystery. For a long time, no one could identify where its mouth was or if it even had eyes. It was as though nature had created a creature without deciding what it should look like yet. Hallucigenia did not roar, it did not hunt, it did not dominate, it simply existed, slowly, quietly, crawling across the ancient seabed, feeding, surviving, and reproducing in a world where almost everything was new. It lived for millions of years, and then eventually it was gone, not because it failed. Not because it was weak, but because evolution moved on. The world changed. New designs replaced old experiments, and hallucigenia faded into stone. As you imagine this tiny creature moving slowly across the ocean floor, you may begin to feel how patient time truly is. 500 million years is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is slow beyond comprehension, and hallucinogenia belonged to that slowness. From this quiet beginning, we drift forward through time, still underwater, but now in a world that feels more familiar. Hundreds of millions of years pass. Life becomes larger, more complex. The oceans fill with creatures that have armor, jaws, and defined shapes. The seas are no longer just places of drifting experiments. They are arenas of survival, balance, and rhythm. In these waters lived another forgotten giant. One that sounds terrifying at first, but whose life was likely far calmer than we imagine. Its name was Dunkleosteus. Dunkleosteus was a massive fish, stretching up to 30 feet in length. Its head and upper body were covered in thick, bony armor like plates fitted together by nature itself. Instead of teeth, it had sharp edges of bone that closed together like shears, capable of slicing through prey with ease. At first glance, Dunkleosteus seems like a monster, a nightmare from the deep. But when we step back and look more closely, a different picture emerges. Dunkleosteus lived in warm, shallow seas during the Devonian period, a time sometimes called the Age of Fishes. The oceans were rich with life, food was abundant, there was no need for constant violence or endless pursuit. Its heavy armor suggests a slow swimmer, not built for speed but for stability. It likely conserved energy, drifting calmly through the water, relying on its presence alone to command space. Smaller animals would have sensed it and moved away long before any chase began. In this way, Dunkleosteus may have lived a surprisingly quiet life, a life of slow movement, long rest, and effortless dominance. It did not need to fight often. It simply existed, and the world adjusted around it. For millions of years, Dunkleosteus ruled the seas without knowing it ruled anything at all. Then, as the planet changed once more, its oceans cooled, ecosystems shifted, and even giants were no longer suited to the new world. Dunkleosteus vanished, leaving behind only fossilized plates and the faint impression of its shape in stone. As you listen, you may notice how often this pattern repeats: long success, long stability, and then quiet disappearance. From the depths of ancient seas, we now begin to rise toward the surface, toward land. Toward a world where life crawled, walked, and eventually stood beneath open skies. Time continues its slow, steady march. Ice ages come and go, continents drift, mountains rise and wear down again. And on these shifting lands lived creatures that feel oddly familiar yet impossibly distant. One of them was Glyptodon. At first glance, Glyptodon looks like a giant armadillo, and in a way it was, but far larger than anything alive today. Glyptodon was about the size of a small car, covered from head to tail in a massive domed shell made of bone. Each plate fit together like a mosaic, forming a living shield. Its legs were short and thick. Its movements were slow and deliberate. Glyptodon was not built to run. It did not need to. Very few predators could threaten something so well protected. It lived during the Ice Age, wandering grasslands and open forests, grazing peacefully. Its days were likely quiet and repetitive, eating, walking, resting, much like the lives of many large herbivores today. Early humans may have seen Glyptodon, may have watched it pass by, a moving hill of armor beneath the sun. To them it must have seemed eternal, unstoppable, permanent, but nothing is permanent. As climates shifted and human populations grew, the slow-moving Glyptodon struggled to adapt. Its protective shell could guard against claws and teeth, but not against a changing world. Eventually, Glyptodon disappeared. Not with a dramatic end, not in a single moment, but gradually, quietly, like so many before it. And as its kind faded away, the world barely noticed. Grass continued to grow. Winds continued to move across the land. New animals took its place. This is where we will gently pause for now. We have traveled from the strange, dreamlike seas of the Cambrian through armored giants of ancient oceans and onto the slow, peaceful grasslands of the Ice Age. Humans. As humans spread across continents, they did not walk alone. They shared the land with animals that still feel close to us, animals that lived not millions of years ago, but alongside our ancestors. These creatures were real enough to be seen, heard, and remembered, and because of that, their disappearance feels different, closer, quieter, more personal. One such animal moved silently through the forests of Australia and Tasmania. It had the body of a dog, the stripes of a tiger, and a presence that felt almost ghost-like even when it was alive. This animal was the thylacine. Also known as the Tasmanian tiger, the thylacine was not a cat and it was not a dog. It was a marsupial carrying its young in a pouch, much like a kangaroo. Its jaw could open unusually wide, almost stretching into a yawn that looked unnatural to human eyes. Its movements were cautious, deliberate, and reserved. The thylacine hunted small animals, kept ecosystems balanced, and avoided humans whenever possible. It did not roar or howl loudly. It slipped through its environment with quiet intelligence. For thousands of years it survived. Then humans arrived in greater numbers. With them came fear, misunderstanding, and competition. The thylacine was blamed for killing livestock, often without evidence. Bounties were placed on its head. It was hunted not because it was dangerous, but because it was inconvenient. By the early 20th century, thylacines were rare. By the time people realized what was happening, it was already too late. The last known thylacine died in captivity in 1936. There are photographs of it, film footage. Images of it pacing slowly inside a small enclosure, unaware that it was the final representative of its kind. No dramatic ending followed. The world did not stop. The forests did not fall silent. The thylacine simply slipped from existence. Sometimes extinction does not arrive as a catastrophe. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet absence. As we move further into forgotten history, we begin to notice a pattern. Many strange extinct animals were not fierce predators or towering giants. Many were gentle, specialized, or perfectly adapted to worlds that no longer exist. Travel now to the islands of the Indian Ocean, to a place of warm breezes and dense forests. Here lived a bird so unusual that it became a symbol of extinction itself, the dodo. The dodo was a flightless bird, roughly the size of a large turkey. It had small wings, a rounded body, and a curved beak. It lived on the island of Mauritius, where for millions of years it had no natural predators. Without predators, there was no need to fly, no need to run. The dodo lived a calm, grounded life, nesting on the forest floor, eating fruit, seeds, and roots. When humans arrived, they brought with them animals that did not belong there: rats, pigs, dogs. These animals ate dodo eggs and destroyed nests. Humans hunted the birds not out of cruelty, but because they were easy to catch. Within a few decades, the dodo was gone. It had survived countless natural changes, yet could not survive sudden human arrival. Its story became a lesson, though one learned slowly. From islands, we now drift back to the mainland, to North America, where massive birds once ruled the skies. Among them was a creature so large that its wingspan stretched wider than many small airplanes. This bird was Argentavis. Argentavis lived around 6 million years ago, long before humans, but not so long ago that it feels unreachable. Its wings could span over 20 feet. It did not flap constantly like modern birds. Instead, it soared. Using warm air currents, Argentavis would glide for hours with barely a movement, scanning the land below. It likely fed on carrion, drifting patiently until food revealed itself. Its flight was not hurried. It belonged to the sky in a slow, effortless way. As climates shifted and large prey animals declined, creatures like Argentavis lost the conditions they needed to survive. The skies grew quieter. The winds carried fewer shadows. Eventually, even the largest wings could no longer find a place to rest. Now let us return to the sea, where some of the strangest forgotten animals lived not in darkness, but in shallow, sunlit waters. There was once a creature that looked like a floating shield, shaped almost like a horseshoe, yet it was neither crab nor shellfish. This was the trilobite. Trilobites lived for over 270 million years. They survived ice ages, mass extinctions, and dramatic planetary changes. They came in thousands of forms, from smooth and rounded to spiked and ornate. Some rolled into tight balls for protection. Some burrowed into sediment. Some swam gently above the sea floor. They were among the most successful animals to ever exist. And then, after surviving almost everything, they disappeared. The extinction that ended the age of trilobites reshaped life on Earth. Entire ecosystems vanished. The oceans transformed. Even the most adaptable forms of life could not continue. Their fossils remain everywhere, scattered like ancient punctuation marks across stone, reminding us how long they endured and how completely they are gone. As your breathing slows, notice how time itself seems to stretch. Millions of years pass as softly as seconds. This is the rhythm of Earth: creation, stability, change, silence. Before we close this part of our journey, there is one more strange and forgotten creature to meet, one that even scientists still struggle to understand. In the ancient rivers and coastal waters of what is now North America lived a creature that looked like nothing else before or since. It is known as the Tully monster. The Tully monster had a long, soft body. At the front extended a flexible proboscis ending in a claw-like mouth. Its eyes were mounted on stalks, stretching sideways from its head, giving it a wide, alien gaze. For decades, scientists debated what it was: a worm, a mollusk, a vertebrate. Even today, its exact place in the tree of life remains uncertain. The Tully monster lived quietly, swimming gently, feeding, surviving in its watery world. It did not need classification. It did not need a name. It simply existed, and then it vanished. Its fossils were preserved not because it was important, but because conditions were just right, because mud settled gently, because time paused for a moment. Standing at the quiet threshold between deep prehistory and the world that feels almost familiar, time keeps moving forward, not in leaps but in slow, patient steps. Ice advances and retreats, seas rise and fall. Life adapts again and again until even the most successful forms begin to feel the strain of change. Now we drift into colder ages. The air grows sharper. Winds stretch across open plains. Vast sheets of ice reshape the land, grinding mountains into dust and carving valleys that will one day hold rivers. This is the world of the Ice Age, a place of long winters, pale skies, and animals built for endurance rather than speed. Among these animals was a creature that looked almost unreal, as though it had stepped out of an unfinished dream. It was called the woolly rhinoceros. The woolly rhinoceros was massive, low-slung, and heavily built. Its body was covered in thick fur, layered to trap warmth against the cold. Beneath that fur was a dense layer of fat, protecting it from freezing winds. Its head carried two enormous horns, the front one long and curved, the second shorter but still formidable. But despite its size and strength, the woolly rhinoceros was not aggressive by nature. It was a grazer, a patient eater of grasses and shrubs buried beneath snow. It used its horns not for fighting, but for sweeping snow aside, clearing paths to food beneath the ice. For thousands of years, woolly rhinoceroses moved slowly across frozen plains, following seasonal rhythms. They lived alongside mammoths, bison, and early humans, shaping and being shaped by their environment. And then the climate changed. As the Ice Age began to loosen its grip, grasslands shifted. Forests crept into open plains. The cold-adapted giants found themselves in landscapes that no longer suited their bodies or diets. Human hunting added pressure, but it was the changing world itself that sealed their fate. The woolly rhinoceros faded away, leaving behind frozen carcasses preserved in ice, their fur still clinging to bone. Even now they seem almost asleep, as though they might wake if the cold returns. Not far from these icy plains lived another gentle giant, one far less famous than the mammoth, yet equally remarkable. This animal was the giant ground sloth. Unlike modern sloths that hang quietly from trees, the giant ground sloth walked on the earth. Some species stood taller than an elephant when upright. Their bodies were massive, their limbs powerful, their claws long and curved. Despite their fearsome appearance, giant ground sloths were peaceful herbivores. They fed on leaves, branches, and plants, using their claws not to hunt, but to pull vegetation closer. They moved slowly, conserving energy, living long lives in stable environments. Imagine one standing beneath ancient trees, gently stripping leaves, unbothered by predators that could do little against such size and strength. For millions of years they thrived across the Americas. Then humans arrived. Slow-moving, large-bodied animals are vulnerable in rapidly changing worlds. Hunting pressure increased, habitats shifted, and one by one the giant ground sloths disappeared. Their bones remain scattered in caves and riverbeds, silent reminders of a slower pace of life, a time when size meant safety and speed was unnecessary. As we move forward, the world becomes increasingly fragmented. Islands form, seas isolate populations, and in these isolated places, evolution takes strange and delicate turns. On a group of islands in the Mediterranean Sea lived elephants unlike any you might imagine. They were dwarf elephants. These elephants were not towering giants. Instead, they were small, some no larger than a modern cow. Cut off from mainland populations with limited food and space, their bodies adapted over generations. Size shrank, energy needs lowered, life became quieter and more efficient. These dwarf elephants wandered island landscapes that no longer exist, browsing gently, living lives shaped entirely by isolation. When sea levels changed and humans arrived, their fragile balance collapsed. With nowhere to go and little room to adapt, they vanished. From the Mediterranean, we traveled to the far reaches of the Pacific, where isolation created one of the most unusual animals ever to walk the earth. On the islands of New Zealand lived the moa. The moa were giant flightless birds, some reaching heights of over 12 feet. They had no wings at all. Their bodies were built for walking through forests, feeding on leaves, fruits, and branches. Without mammalian predators, they evolved without fear. They did not run, they did not hide. They lived openly, confidently in a world that had never required caution. When humans arrived in New Zealand, the moa had no defense against hunting. Within a few centuries, all species were gone. With them vanished the Haast's eagle, a massive predator that relied on moa for food. Its wingspan rivaled that of the largest birds of prey ever known. Without its prey, it too disappeared. This is how ecosystems unravel, quietly, completely. As time continues forward, extinction becomes less about ancient climates and more about fragility, about balance tipping too quickly, about specialization without room for error. In the oceans, strange creatures met similar fates. There once lived a marine mammal known as Steller's sea cow. Steller's sea cow was enormous, reaching lengths of over 30 feet. It lived in cold northern waters, feeding slowly on kelp forests. It moved gently, floated calmly, and lived in small family groups. It had no fear of humans. When sailors encountered stellar sea cows in the 1700s, they found animals that did not flee, that did not fight, that simply continued feeding as boats approached. Within 27 years of their discovery, stellar sea cows were extinct. They were hunted for meat, fat, and hides. Their slow reproduction and gentle nature gave them no defense against sudden exploitation. Their loss reshaped kelp ecosystems, altering marine environments in ways that are still felt today. From the sea, we return once more to land, to a creature that lived closer to our time than many realize. In North America once roamed a horse that was not introduced by humans, but native to the continent. These were prehistoric horses. They evolved in North America millions of years ago, spreading later to Asia and Europe. They grazed on plains, ran from predators, and shaped grasslands long before modern horses ever existed. At the end of the Ice Age, these horses vanished from the Americas. Climate shifts, human hunting, and ecological changes combined to erase them. Thousands of years later, humans reintroduced horses to the continent, unaware that they were returning an animal that had once belonged there. Time, once again, looping quietly back on itself. As we drift deeper into recent extinction, the stories begin to feel heavier, not because the animals were more important, but because they feel more familiar. There was once a bird in North America so numerous that its flocks darkened the sky. The passenger pigeon. Passenger pigeons traveled in vast numbers, moving like living clouds across the continent. Their wing beats sounded like distant thunder. Trees bent beneath their weight when they roosted. They were a symbol of abundance. Yet within a single human lifetime, they were gone. Mass hunting, habitat destruction, and industrial exploitation drove them to extinction. The last passenger pigeon died in captivity in 1914. Something that once seemed infinite vanished completely. This is perhaps the quietest lesson extinction teaches. Abundance does not guarantee survival. Numbers do not equal permanence. As your breathing slows, notice how these stories no longer feel distant. They feel close, tangible, almost personal, and yet the earth does not mourn, it adapts. Forests grow where others fell. New species take old roles. Life continues even as forms vanish. The Ice Age has loosened its hold on the planet. Glaciers retreat into the mountains. Rivers carve new paths. Forests spread where open tundra once stretched to the horizon. The world begins to resemble something closer to what we recognize today, yet it is still filled with animals that feel unfamiliar, as if they belong to another version of reality. This is the age where extinction becomes quieter, subtler, and more selective. Not sweeping planetary catastrophes, but small imbalances. A change in rainfall, a shift in temperature, a new competitor. A human settlement placed just slightly out of balance with the land. In Australia, long before modern cities and roads, there lived a creature that looked like a cross between a bear and a lion, yet was neither. It was called the marsupial lion. Despite its name, the marsupial lion was not a true lion. It was a marsupial, more closely related to wombats and koalas, but evolution shaped it into a powerful predator. It had strong forelimbs, sharp, retractable claws, and jaws capable of delivering a precise, deadly bite. Unlike big cats that rely on speed, the marsupial lion was likely an ambush hunter. It climbed trees, it waited, it struck with careful efficiency. For thousands of years, it ruled its environment quietly, unseen until it was too late. Then humans arrived. As megafauna declined and ecosystems shifted, the marsupial lion lost its prey. Its specialized hunting style, once an advantage, became a limitation. Slowly, its presence faded from the land. What remains are bones, claw marks in ancient caves, and the sense that Australia was once home to a world far stranger than we often imagine. Nearby, in the same ancient landscapes, lived another forgotten giant. This one moved not through trees, but across open ground. It was Diprotodon. Diprotodon was the largest marsupial to ever exist. It looked somewhat like a giant wombat with a broad face, heavy body, and thick limbs. It weighed as much as a rhinoceros and moved slowly across grasslands and woodlands, feeding on vegetation. Diprotodon lived in herds. It followed water sources. It shaped the land through grazing, clearing pathways that other animals used. For a long time, it lived in balance with its environment. But when climates became drier and human pressure increased, that balance broke. Large, slow-breeding animals could not adapt quickly enough. Diprotodon vanished, taking with it an entire way of life that no longer exists. As we move further forward, extinction begins to take on another quality. It becomes invisible. Animals disappear not because they are hunted directly, but because the conditions they depend on vanish quietly beneath them. In the forests of Madagascar lived a group of animals that most people never realize existed. These were giant lemurs. Unlike the small, agile lemurs seen today, giant lemurs were large-bodied, slow-moving creatures. Some were as big as gorillas. They fed on leaves, fruits, and seeds, playing an important role in maintaining forest health. They climbed trees carefully. They moved deliberately. They lived long lives. When humans arrived on Madagascar, forests were cleared. Hunting increased. The giant lemurs could not adapt to rapid habitat loss. One by one, they disappeared. Today's forests still stand, but they are quieter. Certain trees no longer spread as they once did. Seeds that depended on giant lemurs now struggle to travel far. Extinction leaves echoes. In the skies above North America, another forgotten giant once flew. This was Pteratornis, a massive bird related to condors. Pteratornis had long wings built for soaring. It rode air currents effortlessly, scanning the land below. It fed on carrion and small animals, moving slowly and efficiently through the air. Unlike fast flapping birds, it depended on wide open spaces and stable wind patterns. As climates changed and landscapes became more fragmented, its world shrank. Without enough space to soar, it could no longer survive. The sky grew quieter once again. Now let us turn our attention to an animal that lived not in forests or plains, but in the water, and yet feels deeply connected to the land. There was once a species of penguin that towered over humans. These were giant penguins. Millions of years ago, penguins were not small, compact birds. Some species stood over 6 feet tall. They swam through warm seas, using powerful flippers to glide effortlessly through the water. Their size protected them from predators. Their strength made them dominant swimmers. As marine ecosystems changed and new predators emerged, size became a disadvantage. Smaller, more agile penguins survived. The giants did not. Their fossils suggest calm lives spent diving, feeding, and returning to shore, never knowing they were part of an evolutionary experiment that would eventually end. From the water, we drift back to land, to a creature that seems almost fictional. In South America lived an animal known as Macrauchenia. Macrauchenia had the body of a camel, the legs of a llama, and a long, flexible snout that may have resembled a short trunk. It walked across open plains, browsing on vegetation, moving with an awkward but steady gait. Early scientists struggled to classify it. It did not fit neatly into any known group. It was a reminder that evolution does not follow human categories. Macrauchenia lived for millions of years, adapting to changing conditions, surviving where others did not. Then, near the end of the Ice Age, it vanished. Its disappearance coincided with human expansion, climate change, and ecological upheaval. No single cause explains it fully. Like many extinctions, it was likely the result of multiple pressures stacking quietly until survival was no longer possible. As we continue forward, we begin to encounter animals that existed so recently that their absence feels unsettling. On islands across the world lived birds that had forgotten how to fear. Flightless rails, ground-nesting birds, island pigeons, and strange waterfowl evolved without predators. They lived open, trusting lives. When humans arrived, they brought cats, rats, dogs, and pigs, predators that hunted eggs, chicks, and adults alike. Entire bird lineages vanished without ever being named. Some disappeared before anyone wrote them down. They lived and died unknown except for a few bones buried in sand. This is perhaps the strangest kind of extinction, not remembered, not recorded, just absence. In the oceans, something similar happened. There were once sea creatures shaped like spirals, cones, and coils, drifting gently through ancient waters. Ammonites. Ammonites were relatives of squid and octopus, protected by beautifully coiled shells. They lived for hundreds of millions of years, surviving multiple mass extinctions. Their shells came in endless variations, smooth, ribbed, spiked, curved in ways that seem almost decorative. They floated through the oceans, feeding, reproducing, and evolving in quiet abundance. Then came the event that ended the age of dinosaurs. Ammonites vanished completely. Their empty shells settled onto the seafloor, preserved in stone, forming spirals that still captivate the human eye. Symbols of time looping endlessly, yet never repeating. As your mind slows, notice how extinction is not always dramatic. Often it is gentle, gradual, almost polite. Animals do not know they are disappearing. They live as they always have, until one day there are not enough of them left. As we near the end of this part, we approach a final creature for this section of our journey, one that bridges myth and reality. In the rivers and wetlands of ancient Europe lived an animal that inspired legends of unicorns. It was Elasmotherium, sometimes called the Siberian unicorn. Elasmotherium was a massive rhinoceros-like animal with a single enormous horn projecting from its forehead. It lived in open steppe environments, grazing peacefully, using its horn perhaps for display, defense, or clearing snow. For a long time, humans and Elasmotherium shared the land. Stories passed from generation to generation. Over time, memory blurred into myth. Eventually, Elasmotherium disappeared, but its echo remained, transformed into legend. As we pause here, take a moment to rest in the quiet accumulation of these stories. Strange bodies, gentle lives. Long success followed by silent endings, carried gently along the same quiet thread where time no longer feels ancient but familiar. The land has settled into shapes we recognize. Rivers follow courses that still exist. Mountains wear the same silhouettes they wear today. And yet the world is thinner now, less crowded, less diverse than it once was. This is the era where extinction no longer hides behind deep time. It steps closer. It leaves footprints we can follow, names we can pronounce, records we can read. The animals of this age lived close enough to us that some of them shared the same sky, the same water, the same silence. On the grasslands of southern Africa once lived a zebra that looked subtly different from the ones we know today. Its stripes faded toward its back, dissolving into a soft brown coat. It moved in small herds. It grazed calmly. It avoided conflict. This animal was called the quagga. For centuries, quaggas lived alongside humans. They were hunted not because they were dangerous, but because they competed with livestock. Their meat was used, their hides were taken. One by one, their numbers declined. No one noticed when the last quagga was born. No one announced when the last herd disappeared. The final quagga died in captivity in 1883. Today, preserved skins and faded photographs are all that remain. Attempts to recreate the quagga through selective breeding remind us how close it still feels and how far gone it truly is. As we move onward, the pattern becomes clearer. Animals that are calm, slow, trusting, or specialized are the first to vanish when the world changes too quickly. In the forests of North America once lived a bird whose call echoed through the trees like a flute, the Carolina parakeet. Bright green, yellow-headed, and social, the Carolina parakeet was the only parrot species native to the eastern United States. It flew in flocks. It nested in hollow trees. It fed on seeds and fruits, moving through forests that no longer exist. When forests were cleared for agriculture and towns, the parakeet lost its home. When it fed on crops, it was labeled a pest and hunted. Its feathers were used in fashion. Its nests were destroyed. The last Carolina parakeet died in captivity in 1918. A forest once filled with color and sound became quieter without ceremony. Across the oceans, on islands scattered like stepping stones through the Pacific, lived creatures so isolated that evolution shaped them into forms found nowhere else. One such place was Hawaii. Before humans arrived, Hawaii had no mammals, no reptiles, and no predators like those on the mainland. Birds filled every ecological role. Some became nectar feeders, some grazed, some lost the ability to fly entirely. When humans arrived, they brought pigs, rats, mosquitoes, and disease. Forests were altered, invasive species spread, entire groups of birds vanished. The Hawaiian, once known for its haunting, flute-like song, disappeared in the late 20th century. The last known individual was recorded singing alone, calling for a mate that would never answer. That recording still exists, a single voice in the forest, unanswered. From islands, we drift back to mainland Europe, where rivers once supported a fish so large and ancient that it seemed more like a relic than a living animal. The European sturgeon. Sturgeons had existed since the age of dinosaurs. They moved slowly along riverbeds, feeding gently, living long lives. Some individuals may have lived for over a century. As rivers were dammed, polluted, and overfished, sturgeon populations collapsed. Migration routes were blocked. Spawning grounds vanished. Species that had survived mass extinctions could not survive modern development. The water grew quieter. In the grasslands of Asia once lived an animal that stood between wildness and domestication. The aurochs. The aurochs was the wild ancestor of modern cattle. It was massive, powerful, and imposing, with long curved horns and a strong, muscular build. It roamed forests and open plains, shaping vegetation through grazing. Humans hunted aurochs for meat and prestige. As agriculture expanded, land was cleared, habitat shrank. The last known aurochs died in 1627 in a forest in Poland. Today, every domestic cow carries a fragment of its legacy, a reminder that extinction does not always erase influence, only form. As time presses forward, extinction begins to feel like erosion, not sudden loss, but steady thinning. In the rivers of China lived a creature so ancient and so gentle that it was called a living fossil. The Chinese paddlefish. With its long, paddle-shaped snout and smooth body, it moved gracefully through large rivers, feeding on smaller fish. It grew enormous, yet remained peaceful. Dams blocked its migration. Overfishing reduced its numbers. Pollution clouded its waters. In the early 21st century, it was declared extinct. An animal that had lived for millions of years disappeared quietly, without headlines, without ceremony. In the shadows of forests across the world lived frogs with colors so bright they seemed unreal. blue, yellow, red, patterns like warning signs painted by nature itself. Many of these frogs were specialists. They depended on specific moisture levels, specific temperatures, specific plants. As climates warmed and habitats fragmented, they began to vanish. Some species disappeared before scientists could fully study them. Some vanished before they were ever named. Their calls faded from the night air unnoticed by most. Extinction does not always take giants. Sometimes it takes whispers. In the oceans, something similar occurred. There were once coral reefs so vibrant and complex that they supported entire worlds of life. Fish, crustaceans, mollusks, all intertwined in delicate balance. As oceans warmed and acidified, corals bleached, structures collapsed, ecosystems unraveled, species dependent on those reefs declined, some vanished entirely. The sea grew simpler, quieter. As we continue, we encounter animals that were so rare that even while they lived, few ever saw them. The beiji, also known as the Yangtze River dolphin, the beiji lived only in China's Yangtze River. It used echolocation to navigate muddy waters. It lived in small groups. It was shy and elusive. As shipping traffic increased, fishing intensified, and pollution spread, the beiji declined. In 2006, a survey declared it functionally extinct. The river flows on, but something ancient no longer moves within it. In North America, another quiet disappearance unfolded: the great auk. The great auk was a flightless seabird that lived along the North Atlantic. It nested on rocky islands. It swam powerfully, using its wings like flippers. It was hunted relentlessly for meat, feathers, and oil. Colonies were destroyed. Eggs were crushed. The last known pair was killed in 1844. Their bodies were taken for study. Knowledge replaced presence. As your thoughts slow, you may notice a subtle shift. These stories are no longer ancient curiosities. They are mirrors, reflections of choices, of speed, of imbalance. And yet there is no anger in the telling, only observation. Life adapts when it can, and when it cannot, it fades. In the far north once lived a fox with fur so white it blended perfectly with snow. The Arctic fox survives still, but other cold-adapted species were not so fortunate. The sea mink, larger than any modern mink, lived along the coasts of North America. It fed on fish and shellfish, slipping between rocks and waves. It was hunted intensely for its thick fur. By the late 19th century, it was gone. No one noticed the exact moment. As we near the end of this part of our journey, we arrive at a quiet truth. Extinction is not always loud. It is not always dramatic. Often it is a slow dimming, a voice that stops calling, a footprint no longer made. The world continues. Grass grows, water flows, the sky remains, but something specific, something unrepeatable is gone. Now we stand very close to the present, so close that the air feels familiar. The animals we are about to meet did not live in mythic ages or distant ice worlds. They lived under skies we would recognize. Some of them shared years, even decades, with people who are still remembered by name. This is where extinction stops feeling abstract. This is where it begins to feel like something misplaced, something unfinished. In the grasslands and forests of the Middle East once lived a lion unlike the one seen today. It was larger, heavier, with a mane that extended along its belly. It moved through ancient landscapes that are now cities and deserts. This was the Asiatic lion, once spread across regions from Greece to India. It hunted quietly, rested in shaded valleys, and followed seasonal rhythms that had existed for thousands of years. As human civilizations expanded, forests were cleared, prey declined, and lions were hunted as symbols of power and danger. Today, only a single small population survives in one protected area. The rest are gone. An animal that once walked through the pages of early history now survives only as a remnant, its former range reduced to memory. In Japan, rivers once shimmered with the movement of a large, ancient creature, the Japanese river otter. It lived along coastlines and freshwater rivers, feeding on fish and crustaceans. It was shy, elusive, and rarely seen. For centuries, it coexisted with human communities, slipping through water unnoticed. As industrialization spread, rivers became polluted, coastlines were altered, fishing pressure increased, sightings grew rare, then rarer still. In 2012, the Japanese river otter was officially declared extinct. It vanished not with violence, but with neglect. The wetlands of Australia lived a bird whose presence felt almost prehistoric. The paradise parrot, brightly colored, social, and gentle, it lived in grassy woodlands, nesting in termite mounds. It fed quietly, moving in small flocks, dependent on very specific habitat conditions. As land was converted for agriculture and grazing, its nesting sites disappeared. Introduced species disrupted its environment. The last confirmed sighting occurred in the 1920s. Its name remains. Its song does not. Across the Atlantic, in the forests of Europe, wolves once shared the land with humans in uneasy balance. Many populations vanished as settlements expanded, but some disappearances were quieter. The European wild horse, known as the tarpan, roamed open landscapes, shaping vegetation through grazing. It was hunted, interbred with domestic horses, and gradually erased as a distinct animal. By the late 19th century, the last tarpan was gone. Its form survives only through reconstruction and imagination. As we continue, we begin to notice something subtle but important. Many of these animals were not wiped out by a single action. They were worn down, pressured, slowly erased. Extinction here is not a sudden ending. It is a long forgetting. In the Caribbean once lived a seal that rested peacefully on beaches and rocky shores. The Caribbean monk seal. It fed on fish and crustaceans, moving gently through warm waters. It showed little fear of humans. Sailors hunted it for meat and oil. Colonies were disturbed repeatedly. By the mid-20th century, sightings had ceased. In 2008, it was declared extinct. The beaches it once rested on are still there. The water still laps the shore, but the seal does not return. In Africa, another quiet disappearance unfolded. The western black rhinoceros. Once widespread, it declined rapidly due to poaching driven by demand for its horn. Despite conservation efforts, the last individual was seen in 2006. In 2011, it was declared extinct. Its loss was not ancient. It was not inevitable. It happened within modern memory. This is where extinction begins to feel like interruption, a sentence cut off mid-thought. In the forests of Southeast Asia lived a small deer-like animal known as the Schomburgk's deer. Graceful and alert, it lived in wetlands and open plains. It was sensitive to habitat changes. As wetlands were drained and hunting increased, its numbers declined. The last known individual died in captivity in 1938. Photographs show a slender animal standing calmly, unaware that it represented the end of its kind. In the oceans, another disappearance went largely unnoticed by the wider world. The smooth handfish, a small, bottom-dwelling fish that used its fins like hands to walk along the seafloor. It lived only in a narrow range, dependent on specific environmental conditions. As pollution, invasive species, and habitat degradation increased, it vanished. Declared extinct in recent years, it serves as a reminder that even the smallest, quietest lives matter in the fabric of ecosystems. As we move closer still, extinction begins to blur with the present moment. There are animals alive today that exist in numbers so small that they are already ghosts in waiting. The northern white rhinoceros is functionally extinct, with only a few individuals remaining under constant protection. Their world has narrowed to guarded spaces, artificial insemination attempts, and human intervention. Their presence feels fragile, provisional, and yet even here there is no drama, no announcement, just waiting. In the forests of North America once lived a bird whose existence shaped entire ecosystems, the ivory-billed woodpecker. Large, striking, and powerful, it fed on insects hidden beneath bark, helping maintain forest health. As old-growth forests were logged, its habitat vanished. Sightings became rare, then controversial, then uncertain. Today it exists in a state between extinction and belief. Its absence feels unresolved. Throughout these stories, one truth becomes clear. Extinction is not a single event. It is a process, a narrowing of options, a shrinking of space, a quiet withdrawal from the world. Animals do not know they are vanishing. They live their lives as they always have, responding to immediate needs, unaware that the conditions supporting them are slipping away. As listeners, we carry the weight of hindsight. We see patterns they could not, where the distance between past and present has nearly disappeared and the stories no longer feel ancient but immediate. The world we move through now is unmistakably our own. The same oceans, the same forests, the same sky. And yet something within it has thinned, slowly and steadily, almost without notice. At this point in our journey, extinction is no longer something that happened. It is something that is happening, and still the tone remains calm, because the earth itself does not panic, it adjusts. It absorbs loss the way a shoreline absorbs waves, reshaping itself again and again. In the wetlands of South America once lived a bird that moved like a shadow through tall grasses, the glaucous macaw. Its feathers were a soft, pale blue, blending into the sky and water around it. It lived quietly in palm forests, feeding on specific fruits, nesting in trees that grew only in certain regions. It was never common, it never needed to be. As palm forests were cleared and converted to farmland, the macaw lost both food and shelter. Sightings became rare, then uncertain, then historical. No one witnessed its final moment. There was no record of the last individual. It simply stopped appearing. Some extinctions do not end with a body, they end with silence. In the islands of the Indian Ocean lived a creature that rarely appears in lists of extinct animals, despite how unique it was. The Rodriguez solitaire, a close relative of the dodo, it lived on the island of Rodriguez. Larger and more upright than its cousin, it had strong legs and a heavy body. Males used their wings in ritualized combat, producing sounds that echoed through the forest. It lived in isolation, without predators, in a stable world that required no urgency. When humans arrived, forests were cut, nests destroyed, and animals hunted. Within a few generations, the solitaire was gone. Its story reminds us that extinction often travels in pairs. One loss opens the door for another. The dodo fades and the solitaire soon follows. As we continue, we begin to see how tightly connected life truly is. In the grasslands of North America once lived a predator that few people remember, despite its importance. The American cheetah. Faster than any other mammal to ever live on the continent, it hunted pronghorn ancestors across open plains. Its speed shaped the behavior and evolution of prey species that still exist today. When the American cheetah vanished near the end of the Ice Age, its prey survived, still running as if pursued by a ghost. This is how extinction leaves invisible marks. Behaviors remain, adaptations persist, but the reason for them is gone. In the forests of Southeast Asia lived a rhinoceros so small and elusive that many people never realized it existed. The Vietnamese Javan rhinoceros. It lived in dense jungle, feeding on leaves and branches, avoiding human contact whenever possible. For decades, it persisted unnoticed, surviving war, deforestation, and human expansion. In 2010, the last individual was found dead, killed by poachers. Its extinction was not ancient, it was documented, measured, confirmed, and still the forest remains holding space for something that will never return. As we move forward, extinction begins to overlap with conservation, with attempts to intervene, to pause the process, to hold on. In the oceans once swam a whale that followed shallow coastal routes, staying close to land, the Atlantic gray whale. It migrated along coastlines, feeding near shore, making it vulnerable to hunting. As whaling intensified, its numbers declined. By the 18th century, it was gone from the Atlantic. Its Pacific relatives survive, migrating still, tracing routes that once circled the globe. Sometimes extinction is not total, sometimes it is regional, a closing of doors rather than an empty house. In the deserts of North Africa once lived an animal that felt almost mythical, the booble hartebeest. Large, long-faced, and adapted to dry grasslands, it moved in herds across open terrain. Rock art shows it alongside early human communities, woven into daily life and memory. As firearms spread and habitats changed, the booble hartebeest declined. The last known individual was killed in the early 20th century. Its image remains carved into stone long after its body vanished. As we continue, we begin to encounter animals that vanished not because of hunting or habitat loss alone, but because the climate shifted just beyond what they could tolerate. In Central America lived a golden toad. Brilliant orange, small and fragile, it lived in a narrow range of cloud forest, dependent on precise temperature and moisture levels. When climate patterns shifted, breeding pools dried, fungal disease spread, the population collapsed rapidly. The last golden toad was seen in 1989. Its disappearance became one of the first widely recognized examples of climate-related extinction. Sometimes extinction does not knock. It simply arrives when conditions quietly cross a threshold. In the rivers of Europe once lived a creature that shaped waterways without ever drawing attention. The European freshwater pearl mussel. It lived buried in riverbeds, filtering water, improving clarity, supporting entire ecosystems. Some individuals lived for over a century. As rivers became polluted and dammed, mussel populations declined. Many species are now functionally extinct, their ecological role lost even if a few individuals remain. This is another quiet kind of extinction, one that happens underground, out of sight. As we move closer still, we encounter animals whose extinction unfolded in front of modern science yet could not be stopped. The Christmas island pipistrelle, a small bat species that lived only on one island. It fed on insects, roosted quietly, and avoided human presence. As invasive species spread and habitat changed, its numbers declined. Scientists tracked its population carefully. They recorded its calls, they watched it disappear. The last individual was observed in 2009. Extinction here is not ignorance, it is helplessness. In the forests of China once lived a deer so rare it was called the vampire deer, the Pierre David's deer. It lived in marshy areas, feeding on grasses and aquatic plants. Its wild population vanished centuries ago due to hunting and habitat loss. Only a small captive population survived in imperial parks and later zoos. Through careful management, it was reintroduced. This story stands out because it bends the pattern. It shows that extinction can sometimes be interrupted if action comes early enough. But for every success, there are countless quiet failures. In the deep sea lived creatures so strange they seemed untouched by time. Some species of deep-sea corals and invertebrates live for thousands of years, growing slowly, existing in stable darkness. As deep-sea mining and trawling expand, these ancient lives are disturbed. Some species may vanish before they are ever described. Extinction here happens without witnesses. As we reflect, a subtle shift occurs. The story is no longer just about animals that are gone. It is about how disappearance happens, how it spreads, how it often begins unnoticed. Extinction rarely announces itself. It starts with fewer sightings, smaller ranges, longer gaps between encounters, a breeding season that fails quietly, a habitat that looks intact but no longer functions. Animals adapt until they cannot, and then they are remembered only in words. As we approach the end of this part, the journey feels heavier but also clearer. Patterns emerge not as warnings but as understanding. Life on Earth is not fragile because it breaks easily. It is fragile because it is specific. Each species is tuned to a narrow range of conditions. When those conditions drift even slightly, the tuning fails. The Earth continues. Life continues, but the composition changes. The forgotten animals we have met were not mistakes. They were not failures. They were expressions of a world that no longer exists. And now, as we pause here, we stand in a moment that is still unfolding. The future has not been written yet. Where the story has slowed enough for patterns to reveal themselves, the air feels settled now, as though the Earth itself is listening. We are no longer traveling through distant ages or unfamiliar worlds. We are walking through the present's long shadow, where memory, absence, and intention begin to overlap. Here, extinction is no longer only about what has vanished. It is about what remains and how carefully it must now be held. Across the plains of North America once lived an animal whose presence shaped the land in ways most people never noticed. The plains bison. Long before modern times, tens of millions of bison moved across grasslands in vast, slow migrations. Their hooves pressed seeds into the soil. Their grazing patterns prevented shrubs from overtaking open land. Their bodies nourished insects, birds, and predators alike. They were not just animals living on the plains, they were part of the plains. As expansion pushed westward, bison were hunted on an industrial scale. Entire herds were erased in deliberate campaigns. The land changed almost immediately. Grasses grew differently. Soil eroded. The rhythm of the plains broke. By the late 19th century, bison hovered on the edge of extinction. They survived, but just barely. Today's bison exist mostly within protected areas, fenced and managed. They still walk the land, but the relationship has changed. They remain as reminders of how quickly abundance can turn into fragility. Sometimes extinction stops short, leaving behind a version of life that is quieter, narrower, and carefully maintained. In the oceans, a similar story unfolded. There was once a shark so large and so powerful that it shaped marine ecosystems simply by existing. The megalodon. For millions of years, it patrolled ancient seas, preying on large marine animals. Its presence influenced migration patterns, population sizes, and the very structure of ocean life. When climates cooled and prey species changed, megalodon disappeared. But its absence did not leave emptiness. Other predators filled portions of its role. Ecosystems adjusted. Life continued. This is an important truth. Extinction does not end life, it rearranges it. Yet not all rearrangements are gentle. In the forests of Central Africa lives one of the world's closest living relatives to humans, the chimpanzee. Chimpanzees still exist, but their populations are fragmented and shrinking. Forests are divided into isolated patches. Groups are separated. Genetic diversity thins. They are not extinct, but they are closer to the edge than many realize. The same is true for gorillas, orangutans, and countless other species whose names we know, but whose futures are uncertain. Extinction does not always arrive as an ending. Sometimes it approaches as a narrowing corridor. In the Arctic, the world warms faster than almost anywhere else. Ice retreats earlier each year. Seasons shift. Animals adapted to cold, stable environments struggle to adjust. The ivory gull, once common across Arctic regions, has declined sharply. Polar bears travel farther for food. Walruses crowd onto shrinking ice platforms. None of these animals are extinct. But their world is changing faster than their bodies can respond. Extinction often begins with displacement. In the rainforests of South America, species exist that depend on single tree types, specific soil conditions, or narrow elevation bands. When forests are cleared or fragmented, those conditions disappear. Some animals can move, others cannot. The white-lipped peccary, once common across vast regions, has declined sharply in many areas. Its absence changes forest dynamics, seed dispersal, and predator behavior. When one species fades, others feel it. This interconnectedness is not dramatic, it is quiet, it unfolds over decades. As we move deeper into the present, we begin to see how memory itself becomes part of the ecosystem. Museums hold bones, archives hold recordings. Zoos hold the last living members of species that no longer exist in the wild. These spaces are not graveyards. They are attempts to remember. In some cases, memory becomes action. The California condor once teetered at the edge of extinction, reduced to just a handful of individuals. Through intensive conservation, captive breeding, and reintroduction, it still flies. Its wings now cast shadows over landscapes that nearly lost it. But this success required constant effort, monitoring, intervention, human presence woven permanently into its survival. This is the new relationship between humans and many species, not coexistence, not distance, but guardianship. In Australia, the Tasmanian devil survives despite disease and habitat pressures. In Europe, wolves return cautiously to regions they once vanished from. In Africa, elephants walk landscapes increasingly shaped by fences and borders. Life continues, but it does so under watchful eyes. There are animals alive today that exist only because humans have chosen to intervene. The black-footed ferret was once thought extinct. A small population was rediscovered and carefully bred. It survives now through ongoing management. Without intervention, it would be gone. This raises a quiet question. At what point does survival become curation? And does the distinction matter? In the oceans, coral restoration projects attempt to rebuild reefs. In forests, seed banks preserve genetic diversity. In laboratories, frozen cells wait in storage, representing species that may one day be brought back. These efforts exist at the edge of science and philosophy. They are not about returning the past. They are about preserving possibility. But possibility is not certainty. For every species that receives attention, countless others fade unnoticed. Insects, fungi, microorganisms, forms of life that do not inspire documentaries or funding campaigns. Their disappearance may go unrecorded, yet their absence still reshapes the world. Pollination declines, soil health shifts, food webs weaken. Extinction does not require names, it only requires imbalance. As we move toward the far edge of this part of the journey, something becomes clear. The forgotten animals of the past were not warnings sent forward in time. They were simply lives lived fully within their moment. The animals of the present are doing the same. They do not know they are rare. They do not know they are endangered. They respond only to what is in front of them. Food, shelter, mates, space. The weight of knowing belongs entirely to us. And yet this knowledge does not need to be heavy. Awareness does not demand despair, it invites attention. In the quietest sense, this entire journey has been about attention, about noticing what usually goes unseen, about listening to silence and understanding that it once held sound. As we pause here, the story has not ended, it has widened. The forgotten animals are not gone from the Earth's story. They are written into it, shaping what followed, influencing what remains, where the conversation has widened beyond animals alone and begun to touch memory itself. The world we are walking through now is not just shaped by what lives on it, but by what has lived on it. Absence has become part of the landscape, as real as mountains and rivers. In this part of the journey, extinction begins to echo into human culture, into language, into the way people understand themselves in relation to the world around them. When animals disappear, they do not leave only empty habitats. They leave spaces in stories, in symbols, and in meaning. Long before written history, humans shared their world with animals in ways that were immediate and intimate. Animals were not background. They were neighbors, teachers, rivals, and reflections. People watched how animals moved, how they hunted, how they survived seasons. They learned patience from predators, endurance from grazers, and timing from migratory birds. When those animals vanished, something subtle shifted. In the caves of Europe, ancient paintings show animals that no longer exist. Massive bulls, wild horses, strange beasts with curved horns and powerful bodies. These images were not decorations. They were records of relationship. They were acknowledgments of shared space. When the animals left, the paintings remained. They became memories fixed in stone. In many cultures, extinct animals linger as myths, not because people imagined them, but because memory outlasted presence. Stories of enormous birds, giant serpents, horned beasts, and sea monsters may trace back to encounters with animals that no longer walk the earth. When an animal disappears, the story does not vanish immediately. It fades slowly, changing shape as it passes from generation to generation. Detail blurs, function shifts, reality becomes symbol. The mammoth becomes a giant, the aurochs becomes a legendary bull. The great birds become thunder beings or sky spirits. Extinction does not erase, it transforms. In language, animals leave deep traces. Words for strength, speed, patience, or cunning are often rooted in animals that once embodied those traits. When the animal disappears, the word remains disconnected from its original source. People continue to say strong as an ox long after the wild ox is gone. In this way, extinction reshapes thought itself. In some cases, the disappearance of animals changes entire belief systems. Cultures built around seasonal migrations lose their rhythm. Rituals tied to certain species fall silent. Calendars lose markers. When salmon runs collapse, ceremonies fade. When herds disappear, songs lose verses. This is not nostalgia. It is structure dissolving. As we move forward, we begin to see that extinction does not belong only to the natural world. It intersects with human identity. Many indigenous cultures define themselves through relationships with animals. Clan names, origin stories, responsibilities, and ethics are bound to specific species. When those species decline or vanish, cultural continuity is disrupted. The loss is layered, biological, cultural, spiritual, and yet even here the story remains calm. Because culture adapts just as ecosystems do, new symbols emerge, old ones shift, but something irreplaceable is always missing. In modern times, extinction enters culture through a different door: documentation, photography, film, sound recording. For the first time in human history, animals vanish while being watched. The last individuals of some species are photographed, filmed, recorded, their movements preserved, their calls archived. This creates a strange closeness. We can look into the eyes of animals that no longer exist. We can hear voices that will never answer again. This intimacy does not prevent extinction, but it changes how it is experienced. Loss becomes personal, even for people who never shared space with the animal. A child watches a video of a bird that no longer flies. An adult hears a recording of a call that no longer echoes. Memory becomes portable. In museums, extinct animals are reconstructed, skeletons assembled. Dioramas created, environments frozen in time. These spaces are quiet, not mournful but reflective. They invite visitors to slow down, to imagine movement where there is none, to picture breath where there is only bone. Museums do not bring animals back, they hold space for thinking. As extinction becomes more visible, it also becomes more abstract. Graphs, charts, red lists, categories like endangered, critically endangered, extinct in the wild. These words are tools. Necessary but distant. They help manage information, but they can dull feeling. An animal becomes a data point, a trend line, a probability. This is not cruelty, it is scale. When loss becomes widespread, the mind protects itself by generalizing, and yet beneath the numbers, each extinction is singular. One lineage, one way of moving through the world, one set of interactions that will never occur again. As we continue, the story turns inward. What does extinction do to the people who witness it? For scientists, there is frustration, responsibility, grief held quietly behind professionalism. For conservationists, there is exhaustion mixed with hope. For communities, there is sometimes anger, sometimes resignation. But for most people, extinction passes like background noise. A headline, a paragraph, a name quickly forgotten. This is not because people do not care, it is because modern life is loud. Extinction happens slowly while attention is pulled elsewhere. It rarely interrupts daily routines. This makes it easy to believe it belongs to the past or the future, not the present. But extinction is cumulative. It builds quietly, species by species, until ecosystems change in ways that suddenly feel immediate. Pollinators decline and crops suffer. Fish stocks collapse and food systems strain. Forests lose diversity and resilience weakens. Only then does absence become visible. As we move forward, we encounter a paradox. Extinction is both irreversible and ordinary. It has happened throughout Earth's history. Species come and go. Life reshapes itself endlessly. And yet each loss is final. No amount of understanding changes that. This tension sits at the center of our relationship with extinction. We know it is natural. We know it is accelerated. We know we are involved. We know we cannot stop it entirely. So what remains? Attention, care, choice, not control. Choice: which relationships are maintained, which places are protected, which absences are allowed to grow unnoticed. Extinction is not a single problem to solve. It is a condition to live within. As we pause in this part of the journey, the pace slows even more. The story no longer moves through species lists or timelines. It rests in understanding. The forgotten animals we have met were not warnings carved in stone. They were lives that made sense within their moment. Their disappearance reshaped the world that followed. Now the world is reshaping again, not toward an ending, but toward something different. What that difference becomes is not yet clear, and that uncertainty is where we stand. Here, hope does not arrive loudly. It does not interrupt. It settles in gently, like light entering a room long before anyone notices the change. For most of human history, people lived inside ecosystems rather than above them. Survival required attention. Not the abstract attention of study, but the practical attention of listening, watching weather, reading animal movement, knowing when something felt different. When animals vanished in those times, the loss was immediate. Food sources changed, rituals broke, knowledge no longer applied, adaptation was not optional. Modern life softened that feedback loop. Technology created distance. Food arrived from elsewhere. Materials came from unseen places. The disappearance of an animal could occur far away and still go unnoticed. This distance changed how extinction is felt, but it did not remove responsibility. It only delayed awareness. In recent decades, something subtle has shifted, not everywhere, not evenly, but enough to be felt. People have begun to notice absence, not dramatically, quietly. A child notices fewer insects on a windshield. A fisherman notices smaller catches. A farmer notices pollination changing. A hiker notices silence where there used to be sound. These moments are not framed as extinction. They are framed as change, but change accumulates. This is often how awareness begins, not with statistics, but with familiarity breaking. Hope in this context does not mean reversal, it means attention returning. Across the world, people are learning again how to notice, to slow down, to observe not just what is present, but what is missing. This does not stop extinction, but it changes how humans move within it. In some places, species are given space to return. Wolves reintroduced to certain ecosystems reshape entire landscapes. Their presence alters prey behavior, which changes vegetation, which affects waterways. These changes are not forced, they are responses. Life reorganizing itself around new conditions. In other places, rivers are allowed to flow freely again. Dams are removed. Fish return to spawning grounds that have been blocked for generations. Not all return, but some do. These moments matter not because they undo loss, but because they show that relationships can still be repaired even if incompletely. Hope is not about restoring the past. It is about allowing the present to become something more balanced than it might otherwise be. As we move forward, the story becomes less about animals alone and more about restraint. For most of human history, expansion was the measure of success. More land, more resources, more extraction. Now limits are becoming visible, not as rules but as consequences. Soils lose fertility, water sources strain, forests thin, fisheries collapse. These are not punishments, they are feedback. Extinction is one form of that feedback. When viewed this way, extinction is not an enemy, it is a signal that relationships have drifted out of balance. Responding to that signal does not require guilt, it requires listening. In some cultures, this listening never stopped. Indigenous knowledge systems often treat animals as relatives rather than resources, not metaphorically but functionally. Relationships are reciprocal. Responsibility flows both ways. When animals decline in these systems, it is not only a loss of biodiversity, it is a breach of relationship. This perspective does not prevent extinction entirely, but it changes how loss is held. Instead of denial, there is mourning. Instead of abstraction, there is accountability. Instead of distance, there is continuity. Modern conservation increasingly turns toward this kind of thinking, not managing nature but participating within it. This is slow work. It does not produce immediate results. It does not scale easily. It does not fit neatly into headlines, but it aligns with the pace of life itself. As we continue, we begin to see that extinction also reshapes time. The future no longer stretches forward as an endless continuation of the past. It becomes conditional, dependent, responsive. What happens next depends on choices made quietly, repeatedly, without recognition. This can feel heavy, but it can also feel grounding. It reminds us that the future is not something that happens later. It is something that unfolds now in ordinary moments. What is eaten, what is built, what is preserved, what is ignored. Extinction does not happen because people wake up wanting loss. It happens because attention is pulled elsewhere. Hope, then, is simply attention returning. As we near the end of this part, the journey feels less like a path and more like a pause, a place to stand. The forgotten animals we have traveled with are not asking to be saved. They are already gone. What they offer is perspective. They remind us that the world we inherit is not fixed. It is the result of countless interactions, many of which we will never know. They remind us that life adapts, but not infinitely. that resilience has limits. That specificity is both beauty and vulnerability, and they remind us that being alive at this moment carries a particular kind of awareness, not power over the future, but presence within it. As we pause here, nothing needs to be resolved. There is no conclusion yet, only continuation. Most people do not wake up thinking about species loss. They wake up thinking about weather, work, family, time. And yet extinction unfolds within these same rhythms. A road is widened and a wetland shrinks. A forest edge is cleared and a nesting site disappears. A river is straightened and a breeding ground fails. No single moment feels decisive. No one event feels final. This is how extinction moves through the modern world, not as a dramatic collapse, but as a gradual thinning woven into daily decisions. For many people, the first encounter with extinction is subtle. It may come as a memory. Someone remembers fireflies filling summer evenings, then notices they are fewer each year. Someone remembers birdsong at dawn, then realizes the mornings have grown quieter. Someone remembers catching fish easily, then notices how long it has been since the last time. These moments are not framed as loss at first, they are framed as nostalgia. But nostalgia is often memory brushing against reality and noticing a gap. Children growing up now may never know what was once common. They accept the world they inherit as normal, unaware that it is already diminished. This is not ignorance, it is how baseline shifts. Each generation measures abundance against its own childhood, not against history. Extinction hides comfortably inside this process. As we continue, it becomes clear that extinction is not only about animals disappearing, it is about experiences disappearing. The experience of surprise when wildlife crosses a path, the experience of immersion in sound. The experience of being one small presence among many others. When those experiences thin, something changes in how people relate to the world. Nature becomes background rather than relationship. This distance makes loss easier to overlook, and yet people still feel it. Even without knowing names or causes, many sense that something is missing, that the world feels less layered, less responsive. This feeling often shows up as restlessness rather than concern, as a vague sense that something is off. Extinction in this way touches emotional life before intellectual understanding. In cities, this is especially pronounced. Urban environments are often designed to minimize unpredictability. Green spaces are managed, wildlife is controlled, encounters are limited. Animals that adapt well to human presence remain, others vanish quietly. Pigeons, rats, raccoons, and certain birds thrive. More sensitive species retreat or disappear. The diversity that once existed is replaced by a small set of generalists. This simplification makes ecosystems easier to manage but poorer in resilience. It also shapes perception. When people see the same few animals repeatedly, they may assume that wildlife is doing fine, that nature is adapting, and in a sense it is. But adaptation often comes at the cost of complexity. As we move forward, extinction begins to reveal itself as a loss of options. Options for ecosystems to respond to change, options for cultures to draw meaning, options for future generations to experience richness. This loss does not announce itself, it accumulates. In rural areas, extinction often appears differently. Farmers notice soil behaving differently. Pollination patterns shift, pests become more common as predators disappear. These changes are practical, not philosophical. They affect yields, costs, stability. In these moments, extinction is not an environmental issue. It is an economic one, a livelihood issue. But even here, the cause is rarely singular. Multiple pressures overlap: climate variation, market forces, land use changes. Extinction slips between categories, difficult to isolate. As we continue, it becomes clear that modern extinction is deeply entangled with complexity. There are no clean lines, no simple villains. There are only systems moving faster than they were designed to handle. This can feel overwhelming, but the story does not turn toward despair. Instead, it turns toward scale. Not everything can be addressed at once. Not every loss can be prevented, but attention can be focused. People begin to notice specific places, specific species, specific relationships, a local wetland, a river stretch, a forest patch, a single pollinator species. Care narrows, and in narrowing it deepens. This is often where real change begins, not at the level of global solutions, but at the level of familiarity. People protect what they know, they restore what they have walked through, they defend what they have watched change, they mourn what they have personally lost. Extinction becomes real when it has a face, a sound, a place. As we move further into this part, we see how storytelling plays a role. Stories do not stop extinction, but they shape response. When animals are described only as statistics, they feel distant. When they are described as lives, as participants in shared landscapes, they feel present. This is why stories endure. They do not convince through force, they invite attention. In this sense, the journey we are taking now is not about education alone. It is about orientation. It is about learning how to sit with loss without turning away. Extinction is uncomfortable because it challenges assumptions of permanence, of progress, of continuity. It reminds us that nothing is guaranteed, not even what feels abundant. As we continue, the idea of responsibility shifts. Responsibility does not mean saving everything. That is not possible. It means choosing not to look away. It means acknowledging connection even when it is inconvenient. It means understanding that ordinary actions participate in long timelines. This is not about blame. It is about presence. Being present with the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. This presence can coexist with hope, but it does not depend on optimism. Hope here is quiet. It is the hope that attention matters, that care ripples outward, that some losses can still be slowed, that some relationships can still be repaired. As we near the end of this part, the journey feels grounded, not heavy, not light, grounded. The forgotten animals of the past have brought us here, not to an answer, but to a way of seeing. They remind us that extinction is not a future threat or a distant tragedy. It is a process unfolding alongside daily life, and yet life continues within it. Birds still migrate, forests still grow, oceans still move. The world is not ending, it is changing, and how it changes depends in small but meaningful ways on attention, not as a single event remembered by all, but as a gradual inheritance. Something passed down quietly, often without explanation. Each generation receiving a world slightly different from the one before and learning to call it normal. A grandparent remembers fields alive with birds. A parent remembers fewer. A child knows only the silence. None of them are wrong. They are simply standing at different points along the same line. This is how extinction becomes invisible, not because it is hidden, but because it unfolds slowly enough to blend into memory. Across history, people have measured time in lifespans, seasons, harvests. Years, but extinction moves on longer scales. It stretches beyond a single lifetime, sometimes beyond recorded memory. Because of this, responsibility is often blurred. Those who benefit from changes may not be the ones who witness the loss. Those who witness the loss may not be the ones who caused it. Those who inherit the consequences may not know what was altered. This disconnect is not intentional, it is structural. Modern life is organized in ways that separate cause and effect. Energy comes from distant places. Food travels across continents. Materials are extracted far from where they are used. Extinction often occurs far from where decisions are made. This distance makes it easy to feel detached, and yet the consequences arrive eventually, not as guilt but as limitation, fewer options, less resilience, more vulnerability to disruption. In this way, extinction is not punishment, it is constraint. As we move forward, we begin to see how knowledge itself is shaped by loss. Scientific understanding of ecosystems often arrives after damage has already occurred. Researchers study declines, document patterns, analyze causes, but by the time something is understood, it may already be gone. This creates a strange relationship with knowledge. Learning becomes retrospective. Insight arrives after disappearance. Wisdom follows loss rather than preventing it. This is not failure, it is timing. Life moves faster than understanding, and yet understanding accumulates. Each extinction teaches something, even if the lesson arrives too late for that species. Patterns emerge, specialization increases vulnerability, isolation amplifies risk, speed of change matters more than magnitude, connectivity can both protect and endanger. These lessons do not stop extinction, but they shape how future choices are made. Across generations, this accumulated understanding begins to influence behavior. Protected areas are created, species are monitored earlier, restoration is attempted sooner. None of this guarantees success, but it changes trajectory. In this sense, extinction also shapes ethics, not abstract ethics, but practical ones. Questions emerge quietly. What does it mean to take without replacing? What does it mean to benefit from systems that erode elsewhere? What obligations exist across time, not just space? These questions do not demand answers immediately. They settle into culture gradually. In laws, in education, in values passed down, children learn about animals that no longer exist. They learn names that belong only to books and images. For them, extinction is already history, but history carries weight. It shapes expectations. If children grow up knowing that disappearance is possible, even common, they may relate to the world differently, with more caution or with more detachment. Which direction that takes depends on how the story is told. If extinction is framed only as inevitability, it breeds resignation. If it is framed as relationship, it invites care. As we continue, storytelling returns as a quiet force. Stories do not preserve species, but they preserve meaning. They help explain why something mattered. Why its absence changes things, why attention is worth sustaining. Without stories, extinction becomes empty space. With stories, it becomes context. Across generations, stories act as bridges. They carry memory forward even when direct experience is gone. This is why names matter. Naming an extinct animal is an act of recognition. It says, "This was here." It resists erasure. When animals disappear without names, without records, without stories, their loss is complete. No echo remains. As we move deeper into this part, the idea of legacy becomes central. Every generation leaves a legacy, whether intentional or not. Sometimes that legacy is infrastructure, sometimes it is culture, sometimes it is absence. Extinction is part of that legacy, not as blame but as consequence. Future generations will inherit ecosystems shaped by choices made long before they were born. They will adapt to what remains. They will not mourn what they never knew, but they may still feel constraint. The range of what is possible narrows. This narrowing does not mean collapse, it means simplification. Simpler systems are easier to manage but harder to recover when disrupted. This is one of the quiet dangers of extinction. It reduces redundancy. In nature, redundancy is resilience. Multiple species filling similar roles provide buffers. If one declines, others compensate. When diversity thins, systems become brittle. This brittleness may not show itself immediately. It waits for stress, drought, disease, temperature shifts, human pressure. When stress arrives, simplified systems fail faster. This is why extinction matters beyond sentiment. It is not about saving beauty alone, it is about maintaining flexibility. As we continue forward, we see how time compresses. Changes that once took millennia now unfold within decades. Evolution still moves slowly. Climate now moves quickly. Human systems move fastest of all. This mismatch creates tension. Species adapted to gradual change struggle to keep pace. Some can shift ranges, some can alter behavior, some cannot. Those that cannot begin to disappear. Across generations, this accelerating pace reshapes expectations. People begin to accept constant change as normal. Stability feels outdated. Continuity feels fragile. This acceptance can dull urgency. If everything is always changing, why resist any particular change? This is another way extinction hides. It blends into constant motion, but not all change is equal. Some changes expand possibility. Others close doors permanently. Extinction closes doors. Once closed, they do not reopen. As we near the end of this part, the journey feels reflective rather than forward-moving. We are standing in a wide place now where long timelines overlap. The forgotten animals of deep time, the vanished species of recent history, the living creatures of today, the unknown lives of the future. All of them connected by choices, conditions, and chance. This connection does not demand perfection, it invites humility. Humility recognizes limits. It acknowledges that not everything can be saved, that mistakes will be made, that loss will continue. But humility also resists indifference. It keeps attention alive. Across generations, attention is one of the few things that can be passed down intentionally. Skills fade, technologies change, landscapes shift, but attention can be taught. How to notice, how to listen, how to recognize value beyond use. This may be the most enduring response to extinction. Not control, not mastery, but relationship. As we pause here, the sense of time feels stretched again. Not heavy, not urgent, just open. The story has not ended. It has widened once more. Not toward predictions or certainty, but toward imagination itself. Toward how people think about what comes next when permanence can no longer be assumed. For much of human history, the future was imagined as continuity. Seasons would return, animals would migrate, rivers would flow. Children would inherit a world similar enough to learn from elders without confusion. Change happened, but slowly enough to be absorbed into tradition. Extinction alters that expectation. When animals vanish within a generation, continuity fractures. Knowledge passed down no longer applies. Skills learned become obsolete. Stories lose their reference points. This does not stop imagination, it reshapes it. The future becomes something to manage rather than something to trust. People begin to plan defensively. Seed banks are built, genetic material is stored, species are cataloged exhaustively. These acts are not expressions of control, they are acknowledgments of uncertainty. They say, we do not know what will be needed later, but we want to leave options. In this way, extinction changes the tone of future thinking. Instead of abundance, there is precaution. Instead of assumption, there is preparation. This shift is subtle but profound. It moves humanity from a mindset of expansion to one of stewardship, even if unevenly and imperfectly. As we continue, the idea of responsibility stretches forward in time. Responsibility is no longer only about consequences that return quickly. It is about effects that may not be felt for decades, even centuries. This challenges how people think. Human psychology evolved for immediate feedback. For cause and effect close together, extinction breaks that pattern. A choice made today may shape an ecosystem long after the decision maker is gone. This disconnect makes responsibility harder to feel but not impossible. People respond by creating institutions meant to outlast individuals, protected areas, long-term research sites, international agreements. These are attempts to think beyond a single lifespan. They are imperfect. They shift with politics and priorities. But they represent a new kind of imagination, an imagination stretched across time. In some cultures, this way of thinking has always existed. Decisions made with the seventh generation in mind. Actions weighed against long-term balance rather than short-term gain. Extinction brings these perspectives into wider conversation, not as moral superiority, but as practical necessity. When systems are stressed, short-term thinking fails first. As we move deeper into this part, we see how extinction also reshapes creativity. Artists, writers, and musicians respond to loss not with explanation, but with feeling, with atmosphere, with silence. Extinct animals appear in art not as they were, but as absences, shadows, outlines, traces, a painting of a landscape missing something unnamed, a poem about silence where sound once lived, a film that lingers on empty spaces. These works do not document extinction, they translate it. They help people feel what cannot be quantified. In this way, imagination becomes a bridge between knowledge and experience. Science tells us what is happening. Art helps us live with it. Both are necessary. As extinction becomes more widely understood, future imaginaries begin to diverge. Some imagine technological rescue, artificial ecosystems, genetic revival, synthetic substitutes. Others imagine restraint, smaller systems, localized living, reduced pressure. These visions are not mutually exclusive. They coexist, sometimes uneasily. What unites them is the recognition that the future will not simply repeat the past. Something has changed. This realization can feel unsettling, but it can also feel clarifying. If continuity is not guaranteed, then choices matter more, not because they promise control, but because they influence direction. As we continue, we encounter a quieter shift. People begin to value presence over permanence. Experiences over accumulation, moments over guarantees. This shift shows up in small ways. People slow down to notice birds they might not see again. They photograph insects. They learn the names of local plants. Naming becomes an act of care, not ownership, recognition. When something is named, it is harder to ignore. This attention does not stop extinction, but it changes how loss is held. Loss becomes acknowledged rather than hidden. As we move forward, extinction begins to shape humility. Humility is not defeat, it is accuracy. It recognizes that humans are participants, not managers, in a system far larger than themselves. It accepts that unintended consequences are inevitable. This humility changes how the future is imagined, less as a project to complete, more as a relationship to maintain. This does not mean passivity. It means responsiveness, listening for signals, adjusting behavior. Learning from failure, extinction teaches that some lessons come too late, but not all. Some lessons arrive in time to influence what remains. As we approach the end of this part, the future feels neither hopeful nor hopeless. It feels open. Open in the way a forest clearing feels open. Not empty, but full of possibility shaped by limits. The forgotten animals we began with were not lost so that lessons could be learned. They lived because conditions allowed them to live. Their disappearance changed conditions for what followed. Now we live in the conditions shaped by their absence. What we do within those conditions will shape what comes next. This is not a burden. It is simply how time works. Each moment inherits the results of the last and passes something forward. As we pause here, imagine the future not as a destination, but as a continuation of attention. Attention to what is present. Attention to what is missing. Attention to how actions ripple outward. The story has not resolved, it is still unfolding. We continue from this open place where the past still speaks softly and the future has not yet decided what it will become. The journey has slowed to its quietest pace now. There is no more ground to cover, only space to gather what we have carried with us. This final part is not about adding more names to the list of what has been lost. It is about sitting with everything we have already met, the strange shapes, the vanished voices. The long stretches of time where life flourished, faded, and made room for what came next. When we began, we traveled deep into the past, to oceans where life experimented freely, to creatures so unfamiliar they barely resembled anything alive today. We moved forward through ice and fire, through forests and plains, through islands and rivers. We met animals that ruled their worlds for millions of years and others that vanished within a human lifetime. None of them knew they would be remembered. None of them lived as symbols or lessons. They lived because life allowed them to live. This is the quiet truth that sits beneath everything we have explored. Extinction is not a story with villains and heroes. It is not a moral fable written for human understanding. It is a process woven into the fabric of life itself. Species arise, they adapt, they persist for as long as conditions allow. And when those conditions shift beyond their limits, they fade. This has always been true. What feels different now is not the existence of extinction, but our awareness of it. For the first time, one species can look back across deep time and recognize patterns. For the first time, one species can see not only what has vanished, but how quickly disappearance can happen when change accelerates. This awareness does not make us separate from nature. It places us more fully inside it. We are not observers standing apart from a living world. We are participants moving within it, shaping and being shaped at the same time. This realization can feel heavy, but it does not need to be. It can also feel grounding, because it reminds us that we are not responsible for controlling life, only for how we relate to it. Throughout this journey, we have seen that life does not aim for permanence. It aims for balance within the moment. When balance holds, life thrives. When balance breaks, life reorganizes. Sometimes that reorganization includes loss. Sometimes it includes renewal. Often it includes both at once. The forgotten animals we have spoken of were not failures of evolution. They were successful on their own terms. They filled roles, shaped landscapes, influenced other lives, and existed fully within their time. Their absence changed the world, but it did not empty it. New relationships formed. New species emerged. New rhythms took hold. Life continued, not unchanged, but ongoing. This is one of the quiet comforts of deep time. Loss does not stop the story, it redirects it. At the same time, deep time also teaches humility. It shows us how brief even the longest human achievements are compared to geological scales. It reminds us that dominance is temporary and that influence often outlasts intention. We may not see the full consequences of what we do, but they will be seen by forests that grow differently, by rivers that flow new paths, by animals that adapt, migrate, or disappear, and by future humans who inherit a world shaped by choices made long before they were born. This is not a reason for despair, it is a reason for care. Care does not mean saving everything. That is not possible. Care means noticing. It means listening. It means choosing not to look away when silence replaces sound. It means understanding that attention itself is a form of relationship. Throughout this narration, we have moved slowly on purpose. Because extinction is not something that can be understood in haste, it requires stillness. It requires the kind of listening that allows long timelines to settle into the mind without urgency. The animals we have met do not ask for grief. They do not ask for guilt. They ask for recognition. They ask us to remember that the world has been fuller than it is now, and that fullness mattered. They remind us that every species is a unique answer to the question of how to live on this planet. Once that answer disappears, it is never asked in the same way again. And yet the question itself continues. How to live, how to share space, how to move within limits. These questions are not new. They have been asked by every species that ever lived in its own way. We are simply the first to ask them consciously while knowing how long the story already is. As this journey comes to rest, there is no conclusion to deliver, no solution to announce, no ending to seal. There is only continuity. The same continuity that carried hallucinogynia across ancient seafloors, that carried mammoths across frozen plains, that carried birds across skies now quieter than they once were, and that carries us right now through this moment. Extinction is part of that continuity. So is adaptation, so is attention. If there is one thing these forgotten animals leave behind, it is perspective. They remind us that the world is not static, that what feels permanent is often temporary, that what feels insignificant can shape the future in ways we never see. They also remind us that memory matters. To remember is not to cling to the past. It is to understand how we arrived where we are. And understanding is the beginning of wisdom, even when it arrives quietly. As you rest here at the end of this long journey, allow the images to fade gently. The ancient seas, the silent forests, the empty skies, let them dissolve without urgency. The world outside this moment is still alive. Animals are moving, plants are growing, life is continuing in ways both visible and unseen, and time, patient as ever, keeps moving forward, carrying all of it along. If you've made it this far, thank you for sharing this quiet space. If you enjoyed this journey through strange extinct animals everybody forgot, please consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss future episodes like this. I'd also love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me what animal stayed with you the most, or simply let me know where in the world you're watching from. And until next time, rest well and keep listening. Now you will arrange 150 picture prompts for me. Analyze the descriptions you have given me thoroughly and arrange them in 2D cartoons. Make sure there are no duplicates. Now you will arrange 50 for me. First, without any list numbers, then we will move on. ChatGPT can make mistakes. Check important info.